She looked too small for the flight suit, too quiet for the briefing room, too young for the F-22 Raptor. But when enemy radar locked onto their formation at Mach 2.1, everyone quickly learned why Captain Maya Torres had been handpicked for the most dangerous test mission in Air Force history. Edwards Air Force Base in California's Mojave Desert had been the birthplace of supersonic flight for over 70 years. The sprawling facility, known as the center of the aerospace testing universe, was where America's most advanced aircraft came to prove themselves in the unforgiving skies above the desert floor. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the flight line as ground crews prepared the F-22 Raptors for another day of classified testing. Captain Maya Torres walked across the scorching tarmac toward her assigned aircraft, her flight suit crisp despite the 112-degree heat that was brutal even for July in the Mojave. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place through skill rather than politics. But her presence at Edwards was anything but welcome among the elite test pilot community. The 412th Test Wing had been an old boys club for its entire existence, and most of its members intended to keep it that way. As Maya approached her F-22, she could hear the conversations that weren't meant for her ears, but weren't exactly whispered either. "Can't believe they're putting some rookie in the most advanced fighter on the planet," muttered Major Jake Stevens, a veteran test pilot from Michigan who had been flying experimental aircraft for 8 years. "This isn't affirmative action flight school. Give her 2 flights," added Lieutenant Colonel Mike Rodriguez, adjusting his helmet bag. "First time she pulls 7 Gs in that Raptor, she'll be begging for a transfer back to transport duty where she belongs." Staff Sergeant Tommy Chen, the crew chief responsible for Maya's aircraft, shook his head as he watched the men talk. He'd been maintaining test aircraft for 12 years and had seen plenty of hotshot pilots come and go. "You boys might want to check her background before you start making assumptions," he said quietly. "What background?" Jake laughed. "Her file is practically empty. Probably flew cargo runs and somehow talked her way into test pilot school." What none of them knew was that Maya's file was empty because most of it was classified at levels they didn't have clearance to access. The Air Force had redacted 14 months of flight operations that officially never happened. Missions that would remain buried in black folders for decades to come. Maya performed her pre-flight inspection with methodical precision, her hands moving over every surface of the stealth fighter with an expertise that spoke of countless hours in similar cockpits. She checked the engine intakes, examined the control surfaces, and tested the avionics systems with the efficiency of someone who understood that attention to detail was the difference between completing the mission and becoming a statistic. As she climbed into the cockpit, she could see the other test pilots gathered around the mission planning room, their body language making it clear they were discussing her. Through the reinforced glass, she watched Jake make an exaggerated gesture of someone losing control of an aircraft, followed by laughter from the group. The morning briefing had been professional, but cold. Colonel James Harrison, the wing commander, had made it clear that Maya was here on orders from the Pentagon, not because he wanted her. The mission was classified stealth system testing over the Nevada test and training range, with Maya flying as number 4 in a formation of experienced test pilots. "Torres," Colonel Harrison had said, his tone carrying the weight of someone who had already made up his mind. "You'll be flying with Stevens's flight. Try not to embarrass yourself or compromise the mission." The implied message was clear. Don't screw up and don't get in the way of the real pilots. Now, strapped into her F-22 at 47,000 feet over the vast Nevada desert, Maya was about to prove that some assumptions can be deadly. The formation had been airborne for 34 minutes when Maya's radar warning receiver began showing anomalous reading. At first, it was subtle, a slight deviation in the expected stealth signature, a minor variance in the electromagnetic spectrum, but Maya's trained eye caught the irregularities immediately. "Lead 4, I'm detecting unusual radar activity bearing 270, she reported calmly over the encrypted radio. Jake Stevens's voice crackled back with barely concealed irritation. "Copy 4. Probably just system calibration errors. Continue with the test profile." But Maya knew better. She had seen this exact pattern before, during a mission that didn't exist in any official record. The radar signature was too organized, too persistent to be a calibration issue. Someone was actively tracking them with technology that shouldn't exist. "Lead 4, I'm showing active lock-on attempts from multiple sources. Recommend immediate evasive action. This time, time. Jake's response was openly dismissive. Torres, we're in restricted airspace over Nevada. There's nothing out here but tumbleweeds and test equipment. Stay in formation and complete your test sequence. 4, lead, came Colonel Harrison's voice from the command aircraft. Maintain position and continue mission parameters. That's an order. That's when Maya's threat warning system exploded with alarm. Multiple radar signatures had achieved lock-on to their formation, and the characteristics weren't matching any known American system. At Mach 2.1 and 47,000 feet, with limited maneuvering options and nowhere to hide, most pilots would have followed orders and hoped for the best. Mayday, mayday! Multiple hostile radar locks bearing 270 through 320. Maya's voice remained steady, despite the fact that their stealth formation had been completely compromised by an unknown threat. In the command center at Edwards, the atmosphere changed instantly. Coffee cups were set down with trembling hands, and every eye focused on the radar screens, showing Maya's formation being tracked by signatures that shouldn't exist. Lieutenant Colonel Stevens's voice came over the radio, the cockiness replaced by genuine concern. Command, confirm hostile tracks. We're showing impossible readings out here, but Maya was already running calculations in her head. Threat angles, escape vectors, defensive maneuvering options, and a dozen other variables that most test pilots would never consider in a routine mission. What she saw in her tactical display wasn't just a test gone wrong, but a scenario she had trained for during operations that had prepared her for exactly this moment. Lead 4, I'm taking point and initiating defensive protocol, Maya announced calmly. The command center erupted in protests. Torres, maintain formation. Do not deviate from mission parameters. Colonel Harrison's voice was sharp with authority. What they didn't know was that Maya had already identified the threat pattern. The radar signatures were using adaptive frequency hopping and multi-static tracking, techniques that suggested foreign military technology was testing American stealth capabilities in real time. As Maya began her defensive maneuvers, muscle memory took over. Her hands moved across the cockpit controls with practiced precision, configuring the F-22 for threat evasion while maintaining formation integrity. She activated electronic countermeasures that weren't in the standard test pilot manual, using techniques that officially didn't exist. Command 4, implementing Protocol 77 Alpha, Maya transmitted. There was silence on the radio. Protocol 77 Alpha wasn't in any unclassified manual. Torres, what the hell is Protocol 77 Alpha? Stevens demanded. Instead of answering, Maya executed a series of maneuvers that pushed the F-22 to its absolute limits. She dropped to 32,000 feet while simultaneously increasing speed to Mach 2.4, using the desert floor's thermal characteristics to mask her radar signature. The other pilots watched in amazement as her aircraft seemed to vanish from both enemy tracking and friendly radar. Where did she go? Stevens's voice carried genuine alarm. Maya reappeared on their screens 15 seconds later, but her position was impossible. She had somehow moved 3 miles laterally while maintaining formation spacing, using maneuvers that defied conventional understanding of the F-22's capability. Command, threats neutralized through electronic deception. Formation is secure, Maya reported as if nothing extraordinary had happened. In the command center, veteran controllers who had overseen thousands of test flights watched their displays in stunned silence. The hostile radar signatures had lost lock and disappeared, apparently confused by Maya's countermeasure. How did you know how to do that? Colonel Harrison's voice came over the command frequency, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by professional curiosity. Maya considered her answer carefully. For a moment, she thought about giving them the standard response: training, instinct, improvisation. But these men had just witnessed something that required an explanation. Sir, some techniques aren't in the unclassified manual, she said simply. That evening, Colonel Harrison made a series of phone calls to numbers he wasn't supposed to have, to people whose names weren't in any directory. The conversations were brief, but when they ended, he sat staring at his secure terminal for nearly 2 hours, reading files that required presidential-level clearance to access. The next morning, Maya found a new mission assignment on her desk, not a reprimand or a transfer, but appointment as lead test pilot for the wing's most advanced stealth development programs. Attached was a note from Colonel Harrison. Some capabilities can only be validated by someone who's already proven them in conditions we can't discuss. Jake Stevens approached her during the pre-flight briefing, his demeanor completely transformed. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. What you did yesterday, I've been flying for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it. If you're willing to teach, I'd like to learn from someone who obviously knows things they don't cover in test pilot school. Maya looked at the man who had been so eager to see her fail. "The most important thing I can teach you, Major, is that being a test pilot isn't about proving you're better than someone else. It's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible while making sure everyone comes home safely." Over the following weeks, the wing's attitude toward Maya underwent a complete transformation. The pilots who had dismissed her as a diversity hire began seeking her advice on advanced flight techniques and threat assessment. The men who had made jokes about women in fighter jets found themselves learning maneuvers from someone whose experience surpassed their own. Maya never spoke about the classified operations that had prepared her for that day over Nevada. She didn't need to. The proof of her capabilities had been written in the sky during 15 minutes of flying that turned a potential disaster into a demonstration of abilities that officially didn't exist. 3 months later, when Major Stevens successfully evaded a simulated missile attack using techniques Maya had taught him, he credited her training with saving his life during what turned out to be a foreign intelligence gathering operation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the wing. The woman they hadn't wanted had become the instructor they couldn't do without. Colonel Harrison, who had initially opposed Maya's assignment to the wing, wrote in her efficiency report, "Captain Torres represents the finest traditions of Air Force test aviation. Her technical skills, operational experience, and leadership abilities make her an invaluable asset to any unit fortunate enough to have her." But perhaps the most telling change came during a wing social event 3 months after Maya's defensive maneuvering demonstration. As the pilots shared stories and celebrated another successful test cycle, Jake Stevens raised his beer and offered a toast. "To Captain Torres," he said, his voice carrying the respect of someone who had learned an important lesson. "The pilot who taught us that skill isn't determined by appearance, and heroes don't always look like what we expect." The response was unanimous. "Here, here." Maya smiled and raised her own glass. "To good flying and safe testing," she replied, "and to remembering that we're all on the same team." As the evening continued, Maya found herself surrounded by pilots eager to hear more about advanced defensive techniques, electronic warfare procedures, and the mental preparation required for classified operations. The woman who had once been seen as an unwelcome outsider had become the heart of a wing that was stronger, more capable, and more unified than ever before. But late that night, as Maya reviewed the day's test reports, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Not because she had proven herself to the men who had doubted her, but because she had found a way to pass on knowledge that might someday save lives in situations that couldn't be discussed publicly. The classified missions would remain classified. The operations that had forged her skills would never appear in any official history. But in a wing of test pilots who now understood that excellence has no gender, her legacy would continue every time one of them faced an impossible situation with the confidence that comes from learning from someone who had already survived the unthinkable. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones that don't make the headline. Sometimes the greatest teachers are the ones whose credentials can't be displayed on the wall. And sometimes the people others don't want turn out to be exactly the people everyone needs. Captain Maya Torres had proven all of these truths in 15 minutes of perfect flying over the Nevada desert. And in doing so, she had changed not just her own career, but the lives and perspectives of every pilot who had witnessed her grace under pressure. The woman they didn't want had become the pilot they couldn't imagine flying without.